there is belief, and then there is skepticism. And between those two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. But what if reality is far more complex than we've been willing to perceive? And what if the stories that we dismiss as myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to mysterious lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it the paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some search the stars for answers, while others look within. They are all connected, threads in the grand tapestry of life. But we stand at a place where the fabric between realities is much thinner than you might think, because this is Crossroads of the Veil. There are places on this map that do not want you to find them. We like to think that the world has been tamed, that satellites and GPS have stripped the mystery from the globe, leaving us with nothing but paved roads and predictable outcomes. But that is a lie we tell ourselves to sleep better at night. If you go north, far north, past the tree line where the roads turn to gravel, and then to nothing at all, you realize that the map is not the territory. The territory is a living, breathing, and occasionally hostile thing. Today we are opening the dossier on a place that has earned its name in blood. In the southwest corner of Canada's Northwest Territories, there is a slash in the earth called the Nahanni National Park Reserve. It is a United Nations World Heritage Site, a place of breathtaking waterfalls, twice the height of Niagara, and limestone cathedrals that rise 3,000 feet, straight up into the subarctic sky. But to the people who know the history, the Diné elders, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the old prospectors who drink whiskey in Fort Simpson and refuse to look at the mountains, it has a different name. They call it the Valley of the Headless Men. This isn't just a spooky campfire story. This is a forensic reality. This is a place where men went in with their heads on their shoulders, and if they came out at all, it was without them. We are going to walk the trail of the McLeod brothers. We are going to look at the police reports. We are going to ask why experienced woodsmen, men born to the bush, would die of starvation in a valley teeming with game, and why they would be found reaching for a rifle they never had the chance to fire. To understand the mystery, you have to understand the stage. The Nahanni is not just a river, it is a fortress. It carves through the Mackenzie Mountains like a wound. The geography itself seems designed to trap you. You have the splits, a labyrinth of gravel bars and log jams that can shred a canoe in seconds. You have the canyons, first, second, third, and fourth, which act like funnel traps. Once you are in, the walls go up, vertical limestone soaring thousands of feet, blocking the sun, trapping the wind. And that wind, explorers have written about it for a century. It doesn't just blow, it screams. It creates a sonic environment that wears down the human mind. A constant low-frequency vibration that settles in your chest and tells you on a primal level that you are not welcome here. The local indigenous people, the Diné, have known this for thousands of years. They call it the river of the land of the Naha people. But they didn't live in the deep canyons. They knew better. They knew that the deep valley was the home of McLeod, bad medicine. They spoke of Tsonatai, the bad thing, a malevolent spirit that walked the high ridges. They avoided the area not out of superstition, but out of survival instinct. But at the turn of the 20th century, a new kind of person arrived in the north. Men who didn't respect the spirits. Men who didn't care about bad medicine. They only cared about one thing: gold. This is where our story truly begins. With the McLeod brothers. Willie and Frank McLeod were not greenhorns. They were not tourists from London or New York playing at being explorers. They were sons of a Hudson's Bay company. They had grown up in the shadow of the forts. They knew the language of the forest. They knew how to track, how to hunt, how to read the water. Willie, in particular, was described by contemporaries as having embraced his indigenous heritage, reflecting their culture and customs. These were men who should have been able to survive anywhere in the North. In 1904, the Klondike gold rush was fading, but the fever was still burning in the blood of men like the McLeods. They heard the whispers, the rumors of a lost mine in the Nahanni, The stories of Indians coming into trading posts with nuggets the size of goose eggs, paying for supplies with raw gold and refusing to say where they found it. The McLeods decided they were going to find the source. They went in the hard way. They didn't take a bush plane. They took sleds and canoes. They fought their way up the Liard through the desolate winter, dragging their gear over the ice. And the incredible thing is, they succeeded. On that first trip, somewhere up the Flat River, a tributary of the Nahanni that is just as wild and twice as lonely, they found it. They found the gold. They came back to the trading post with a small fortune. They showed off a watch chain made of raw gold nuggets, a taunt to every other man who was busting his back for pennies. But gold is a sickness. It's an addiction. You can't just find it once. You have to go back. You have to get it all. And that was their mistake. In 1905, Willie and Frank McLeod loaded up their canoes again. This time they took a third man with them, a Scottish engineer whose name is often debated, but who is usually referred to as Robert Weir. They paddled up the river, past the splits, into the shadow of the canyons, and then silence. The seasons turned. The ice came, locking the river in its white grip. Then the breakup came, the ice shattering and roaring down the canyons like cannon fire. But the McLeods didn't come back. Now, in the north, missing a season isn't uncommon. You get stuck. You winter over. You wait for the water to clear. But 2 years, 3 years, that's not a delay. That's a disappearance. In 1908, their brother Charlie McLeod couldn't take the not knowing anymore. Charlie was a hard man, a man who wouldn't let the wilderness keep what belonged to him. He gathered a search party, a posse of trappers and ex-Mounties. In 1908, their brother Charlie McLeod couldn't take the not knowing anymore. Charlie was a hard man, a man who wouldn't let the wilderness keep what belonged to him. He gathered a search party, a posse of trappers and ex-Mounties, and they went in. They fought the river, pulling their canoes up the rapids, scanning the banks for any sign of a camp, a blaze on a tree, a piece of wreckage. They found nothing in the first canyon, nothing in the second, but then they reached a place that is now marked on every map of the territory with a name that serves as a warning: Dead Men Valley. It's a wide, bowl-like opening in the mountains, a place where the river slows down and the trees grow thick. On the banks of the river, Charlie found a sled runner, a piece of wood that had been split and used as a marker. On it, written in pencil, was a message from the past. It said, simply, "We have found a fine prospect." It was the confirmation of the gold, but it was also a tombstone. Charlie and his men pushed into the timber, and there, in a small clearing, they found the camp. It wasn't a camp of men who had starved. Starvation is a slow process. You burn your gear for warmth. You eat your dogs. This camp was frozen in time. The tools were there. The supplies were there. And the bodies were there. 2 skeletons lay on the ground. They were identified by their clothes and by that famous gold watch chain. It was Willie and Frank, but something was wrong, desperately wrong. The skeletons were headless. Let's pause and look at the forensics of this. This is 1908. We are miles from civilization. If a bear attacks you, it mauls you. It leaves a mess. It doesn't surgically remove the head and leave the body relatively intact. If wolves attack, they scatter the bones. These bodies were found in positions that suggested a sudden, violent interruption of life. One brother lay under his blanket, as if he had been killed in his sleep. The other was sprawled out, his arm outstretched, reaching towards his rifle. That one detail changes everything. It tells us that whatever happened, happened fast. It tells us that they were attacked. But by what? The third man, the Scottish engineer Weir, was gone. Vanished. Did he kill them? Did he go mad with gold fever, decapitate his partners, and run off into the bush with the loot? It was the prevailing theory for a short time. The Mounties wanted to believe it because murder is ugly, but it is understandable. It fits the human paradigm. But there were holes in the theory. Why leave the gold? The search party found the gold quartz samples. If you kill for gold, you take the gold. And where did Weir go? You don't just walk out of the Nahanni. It is hundreds of miles of brutal terrain. If he tried to hike out alone, he would have died. And in fact, a body was found years later, miles away, that some claimed was Weir. But if he died in the bush, who took the heads? This is where the geographic kill zone theory begins to take shape. We have a specific location, Deadman Valley. We have a specific injury, decapitation. And we have a specific context, resource abandonment. They left their guns. They left their food. They didn't starve. They were executed. The discovery of the McLeod brothers didn't stop the gold rush. If anything, it fueled it. The blood made the gold seem more real. If men were willing to kill for it, it must be there. But the headless bodies sent a different message to the Dini. To them, this wasn't a murder mystery. It was a confirmation of what they had always known. The valley wasn't empty. The Naha were gone. Or were they? The legends spoke of a tribe that had vanished. Yes, but the legends also spoke of what had replaced them. Or perhaps what had hunted them. The Dine hunters spoke of the Nakani, the Bushman, a hairy giant that moved through the trees like smoke. They spoke of the Waheela, a white wolf beast with a head as wide as a bear, a creature that didn't hunt in packs but hunted alone, a creature that was known, in the hushed whispers of the elders, to decapitate its prey. Charlie McLeod buried his brothers there in the valley. He planted a wooden cross. He went back to civilization and he told his story. But he knew, and the men who listened to him in the smoke-filled rooms of the trading posts knew, that the official explanation, starvation or simple murder, was a lie. You don't lose your head to starvation. The Nahanni had tasted blood, and it wasn't done. The wind was rising in the canyon, and if you listened closely, you could hear the sound of a closing trap. If the death of the McLeod brothers was the opening shot, the death of Martin Jorgenson was the declaration of war. We have to understand the psychology of the North in the early 20th century. When the McLeods were found headless in 1908, it sent a shockwave through the territory. But it didn't stop the flow of men, it actually accelerated it. Fear is a powerful deterrent, but greed. Greed is a biological imperative. The McLeods died, yes, but they died rich. Their court samples proved that the gold was real. To a certain breed of man, the kind of man who walks into the subarctic with a pickaxe and a rifle, the McLeods weren't victims of a curse. They were victims of their own incompetence or bad luck. Every prospector thinks they are the exception. Every prospector thinks they are the one who will beat the odds. Enter Martin Jorgenson. Jorgenson was not a weekend warrior. He was a Norwegian, a man carved out of the same hard granite as the mountains he sought to conquer. He was a veteran of the Yukon Gold Rush. He knew the cold. He knew the isolation. He knew how to read the land and how to survive on nothing but wits and pemmican. He arrived in the Nahanni around 1910, not with the wide-eyed optimism of a greenhorn, but with the calculated grimness of a professional. He had heard the stories. He knew about the Headless Valley, and he didn't care. He set his sights on the Flat River, the same turbulent tributary where the McLeods had reportedly found their fortune. He didn't just camp, he dug in. He built a substantial log cabin near the riverbanks. He established a base of operations. For years, he worked the gravel bars and the creek beds, fighting the mosquitoes in the summer and the 60-below silence in the winter. And he won. We know this because he sent a letter out. In the days before satellite phones, a letter was a testament. It was a physical proof of life. He sent word to his friends and potential investors that he had struck it rich. He had found the mother lode. He had done what the McLeods died trying to do. He was getting ready to come out, to bring his gold to market, to claim his victory over the Nahanni. And then the silence returned. It is the silence that gets you in the North. It isn't a quiet silence. It is a heavy, oppressive weight. When a man like Jorgenson stops communicating, you don't assume he's busy. You assume he's dead. In 1915, a search party was organized. It was led by Poole Field, a legendary figure in the territory, a former Mountie and a trader who knew the Nahanni better than any white man alive. Field wasn't a man prone to flights of fancy. He dealt in furs, supplies, and hard facts. He led the patrol up the river, past the splits, past the towering cliffs of the First Canyon, into the dark heart of the reserve. They expected to find Jorgenson holed up, maybe sick, maybe injured. They expected to find a cabin. What they found was a scar on the earth. The cabin was gone. It hadn't just collapsed. It had been burned to the ground. The logs were reduced to charcoal skeletons. The equipment was twisted and blackened by intense heat. Fire in the wilderness is a terrifying thing, but a cabin fire in the winter, that is a death sentence. They began to sift through the ashes, and there, amidst the debris of a life spent battling the elements, they found Martin Jorgenson. Or at least they found his torso. Just like the McLeod 7 years earlier, Martin Jorgenson was headless. The discovery fundamentally changed the narrative of the Nahanni. One headless body is a tragedy. 2 headless bodies is a coincidence. 3 is a pattern. And Jorgenson's death added a new, terrifying variable to the equation: fire. Animals don't burn cabins. Wolves don't set fire to a structure to hide a body. Bears don't use arson to cover their tracks. This was an act of intelligence. It was an act of concealment. Someone or something had killed Jorgenson, removed his head as a trophy or a method of preventing identification, and then torched his home to destroy the evidence. Forensics in 1915 were primitive, but the implications were clear. Jorgenson had a rifle, a Savage Model 99, a high-powered lever-action gun that could just stop a grizzly. It was missing. Some reports say it was found later in the ashes. Others say it was gone entirely. But the gold he claimed to have found, was gone. This birthed the mad trapper theories. Was there a serial killer loose in the mountains? A human predator who stalked prospectors, waited for them to do the hard work of finding the gold, and then harvested them? It is a comforting theory because it keeps the horror within the realm of the human. We understand murder. We understand greed. We don't understand headless corpses left in burning cabins in a valley that the indigenous locals refused to enter. But the pattern didn't stop with Jorgenson. It escalated. Years later, in 1927, another man known as Yukon Fisher was found in the valley, dead. Some reports say headless, others say simply mysteriously deceased. But the moniker Dead Men Valley was now firmly etched onto the maps. Then came Phil Powers in 1931. Powers was a trapper, a man who lived alone in a cabin on the Flat River. When the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Patrol finally reached his site, they found a familiar scene. The cabin was burned to the ground. In the ashes, they found Powers' charred remains, and yes, the skull was missing. But here is where the forensic details get truly chilling. Powers wasn't found in his bunk. He wasn't found near the door trying to escape. He was found lying in the middle of the floor, and near his body was his rifle. The barrel was bent, twisted as if it had been used as a club, in a desperate, close-quarter struggle against something immense. If Powers had been surprised by a fire, he would have run. If he had been attacked by a bear, the cabin would likely still be standing, or at least not burned to ash. The fire is the signature. It suggests a cleaning of the scene, a sanitization. So let's look at the profile of the killer. We have a suspect who decapitates victims, removes the heads from the scene, and uses fire to destroy the location of the murder. This suspect operates over a span of decades, in one of the most inhospitable terrains on Earth. This suspect leaves no tracks, no witnesses, and takes the gold but leaves the expensive equipment. This is where the curse of the Nahanni transitioned from a campfire ghost story to a genuine psychological phenomenon. Prospectors stopped going in alone. They started going in heavily armed groups, and even then they reported the feeling, the unshakable primal sensation of being watched. Men who camped in the valley reported waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps circling their tents. Heavy, bipedal footsteps. They reported the feeling of infrasound, a deep vibration in the chest that causes irrational panic. They reported finding their caches raided, but not by animals. Cans were crushed, not bitten. Trees were twisted and snapped at heights of 8 or 9 feet, far above the reach of a man or a bear. The burning of the cabin suggests something else too. It suggests a territorial dispute. When you burn a man's home, you are erasing his presence. You are telling anyone who comes after him, do not build here. This is not your land. This brings us back to the Dene oral history. Remember, they called this place the river of the land of the Naha. The Naha were the original inhabitants of the mountains. They were not Dene. They were different. They were described as larger, fiercer, a warrior tribe that lived in the high cliffs and raided the settlements of the lowlands. The Dene feared them. They avoided the Naha territory at all costs. But the story goes that the Naha vanished. disappeared overnight. When the prospectors like Jorgenson and Powers entered the valley, they weren't just entering a wilderness. They were building their cabins on the ruins of a vanished civilization. They were digging into ground that was perhaps sacred, cursed, or even perhaps protected by something that survived when the Naha disappeared. The burning of the cabins mimics a specific type of warfare. It is a scorched earth tactic. It is a way of ensuring that the invader cannot return. Is it possible that the decapitations were not the work of a single serial killer or a random cryptid attack, but the continuation of a war that has been fought in these canyons for centuries? Jorgenson thought he was alone. He thought his rifle and his walls would protect him, but he was wrong. The walls of his cabin became his pyre. The rifle was useless against a shadow that strikes in the night. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of entity collects heads? In human history, head hunting is a ritualistic practice. It is about power. It is about capturing the soul of the enemy. It is a warning to others. But in the animal kingdom, decapitation is rare. Predators kill to eat. They crush the throat. They disembowel. They do not surgically remove the head and hide it miles away from the body. The Waheela theory, the giant wolf beast, attempts to explain this. A massive canid with jaws powerful enough to pop a human head off like a dandelion. We will get to that later. But wolves, even giant prehistoric ones, do not possess the cognitive capacity to commit arson. They do not burn down cabins to cover their tracks. So we are left with the uncomfortable possibility of a human or near-human agency, a relict population of hominids, the descendants of the Naha, or something entirely different. There is a detail in the police report regarding the death of a later victim, a man named John O'Brien, that adds another layer to this nightmare. O'Brien was found frozen solid in the winter of 1922, not far from Deadman Valley. He wasn't headless, but he was found kneeling over a pile of kindling, a match in his hand, frozen in the very act of trying to light a fire. He had frozen to death in seconds, it seemed. But looking closer at the reports from that era, there is a recurring theme of flash freezing or men dying in states of unnatural rigor, as if they were paralyzed by fear or an external force before the cold took them. The valley kills in many ways. It takes heads. It burns homes. It freezes men in mid-motion. Martin Jorgenson went into the valley looking for gold. He found it, and the price he paid was death. His cabin is gone, his body is dust, and his head is missing. All that remains is the legend, the warning. He proved that the gold was real, but he also proved that the cost of doing business in the Nahanni is your soul. As the smoke from Jorgenson's cabin drifted up into the cold limestone walls of the canyon, it signaled the end of the age of innocence in the Nahanni. The gold rush was over. The era of the manhunt had begun. The police would come, the expeditions would come. They would bring airplanes and radios and modern science. But the valley didn't care. It had a secret that it was keeping, a secret buried deeper than the gold. Because before the prospectors, before the Mounties, before the maps were drawn, there was a people here. A people who built armor and lived in the clouds. A people who vanished in a single night, leaving only their campfires burning. Who were the Naha, and did they really disappear, or did they just go underground? History hates a vacuum. It abhors an empty space on the map or a blank page in the chronicle. But in the Nahanni Valley, the history is defined by what isn't there. We have talked about the bodies, the gruesome reality of the McLeod brothers and Martin Jorgenson. We have talked about the fires that consumed their cabins. But to understand why the valley kills, we have to go back further. Before the gold rush, before the fur trade, before the white man ever set foot in the Mackenzie Mountains. We have to talk about the Naha. If you look at the official histories, the Naha are often dismissed as a footnote, a localized legend of the Dene people. But when you dig into their customs and culture, when you listen to the oral traditions that have been handed down with the precision of a legal record, a different picture emerges. The Naha weren't spirits, and they weren't ghosts. They were a civilization, and they were terrifying. The local indigenous groups, the Slavey, the Casca, the Mountain Dene, lived in the lowlands. They were river people, trappers, and hunters who moved with the seasons. But the Naha were mountain lords. They inhabited the high, jagged peaks of the Tlogocho Range and the plateaus that overlooked the canyons. They were described as distinct, physically larger, and culturally aggressive. They were the raiders. For generations, the Naha would descend from the clouds like a storm. They swept down into the settlements along the Liard and Mackenzie rivers, capturing women, stealing food, and killing anyone who stood in their way. They were the boogeymen of the north, but they were flesh and blood. We even know what they wore. This is a detail that lends credence to the reality of their existence. In a landscape where most tribes wore hides and furs, the Naha were said to wear armor. Specifically, armor vests made of tightly woven willow sticks or bone, designed to turn a knife blade or an arrow. They were heavy infantry in a world of light skirmishers. They were a military caste living in a natural fortress that no one else dared to enter. The Dini lived in constant abject fear of them, the river of the land of the Naha people. It wasn't just a geographical marker, it was a border. You didn't cross it unless you wanted to die. But then something changed. The raid stopped. The smoke that usually rose from their high-altitude camps ceased to stain the sky. The oral history tells of a specific event, a turning point. The Dine elders, tired of living in fear, decided to strike back. They gathered a war party. This wasn't a small raiding group. This was an extermination force. They armed themselves and began the grueling ascent into the mountains. They moved by night, ghosting through the forest, climbing the scree slopes, terrified that at any moment the Naha sentries would spot them. They located the main Naha village. It was situated high up, likely in a box canyon or a protected plateau, a place designed to be defensible. They waited for the dawn, preparing to rush in and slaughter their oppressors in their sleep. When the sun broke over the peaks, they charged. They ran into the village, weapons raised, screaming their war cries, expecting resistance, expecting blood, but they found only silence. The village was empty, but the campfires were still smoldering. The pots were still hanging over the coals, and the food inside them was warm. Tools were scattered on the ground where they had been dropped. Sleeping robes were laid out. The Naha were gone, every man, woman, and child. They hadn't packed. They hadn't fled in a panic, scattering debris. They had simply vanished. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them, or the sky had sucked them up. The Dine warriors stood in the middle of that empty village, and the triumph turned to ice in their stomachs. To find an enemy is one thing. To find a void is something else entirely. It suggests that whatever took the Naha was stronger, faster, and more terrifying than the Naha themselves. The warriors fled. They didn't loot the village. They didn't stay to celebrate. They ran back to the lowlands and told their people that the Naha were gone, taken by the valley, and they never went back. So, where did they go? This is one of the great anthropological mysteries of North America. You cannot simply misplace an entire tribe. A civilization leaves footprints. There are three prevailing theories, ranging from the academic to the horrific. The first theory is the Navajo connection. This is a favorite among linguists and historians. The Navajo people of the American Southwest, the Dene, speak a language that is part of the Nadine family. It is linguistically related to the languages spoken in the Northwest Territories. The Navajo origin stories speak of a great migration from the north, a long walk from a land of ice and mountains. Is it possible that the Naha didn't vanish, but migrated? That they saw a threat coming, perhaps a changing climate, perhaps a resource collapse, and left en masse? It would explain the sudden disappearance. They walked south, fighting their way down the continent, eventually becoming the fierce, dominant warriors of the desert Southwest. There is a chilling linguistic echo here. The Navajo word for their ancestors, or the ancient people who lived in the cliff dwellings before them, is Anasazi. It is often translated as ancient ones, but a more accurate translation is ancient enemies. The Naha were the enemies of the north. Did they carry that identity with them? Did they flee the Nahanni only to become the ancient enemies of the south? It is a compelling theory, but it has a flaw. The timing. The Navajo migration is generally dated centuries before the reported disappearance of the Naha in the oral histories. Unless the oral history is compressing time, which happens, the timelines don't quite sync. And why leave the food cooking? Why leave the tools? A migration is planned. You pack. You take your wealth. You don't leave your dinner on the fire. The second theory is biological. In 1946, a geologist named Donald Carroll proposed a theory that is straight out of a bio-thriller. He suggested that the Naha weren't taken by spirits, but by bacteria. He proposed that they were wiped out by a virulent form of Staphylococcus meningitis. The theory goes like this. Russian trappers, pushing in from Alaska, might have introduced a pathogen to the region. The Naha, isolated in their mountain strongholds, would have had zero immunity. If a disease like that hit a closed population, it wouldn't just kill them, it would liquefy them. It moves fast. It causes delirium, paralysis, and death within hours. If the tribe was struck by a rapid onset plague, they might have died where they stood. The Dini warriors, arriving later, might have found the bodies, or perhaps the scavengers had already done their work, leaving only bones that were quickly covered by the shifting shale and snow. Or perhaps the Dini found the bodies, grotesque and twisted by disease, and were so horrified that they struck the memory from their stories, replacing the biological reality with the cleaner narrative of vanishing. But the third theory is the one that keeps the elders awake. It is the theory that brings us back to the geographic kill zone. The Naha lived in the mountains. The mountains are honeycomb structures. The Nahanni is famous for its topography, limestone dissolved by water, creating massive, unexplored cave systems. We know these caves exist. The Grota Valerie, discovered later, is an ice cave filled with the perfectly preserved skeletons of ancient sheep that wandered in and got lost. Did the Naha go underground? This aligns with the legends of the Nakani, the Bushman. The Dine described the Nakani as hairy giants, yes, but also as troglodytes, cave dwellers, creatures that live inside the mountains and come out only to hunt. What if the Naha didn't vanish? What if they devolved or evolved? What if they retreated into the cavern systems to escape a changing climate or a new enemy, and over generations adapted to the dark? The paleo-human relic theory suggests that the Naha might still be there, living in the thermal pockets deep beneath the earth, protecting their territory from the shadows. This would explain the bad medicine. It would explain the feeling of being watched. It would explain why the prospectors found their cabins burned. If you build your house on the roof of someone else's bunker, don't be surprised if they burn it down. The disappearance of the Naha created a vacuum, a terrifying empty space in the middle of the map, and nature abhors a vacuum. When the gold rush hit, white men rushed in to fill that space. They looked at the empty valley and saw opportunity. They didn't see the warning signs. They didn't understand that the emptiness was actually a quarantine zone. The Naha left their campfires burning. It was a suspended moment, a breath held for a century. And when the McLeod brothers walked into that valley, they let that breath out. The disappearance of the Naha is the foundation of the curse. It established the rules of engagement. The valley takes people. It takes them quickly, completely, and without explanation. But there was another lure in the Nahanni, something even more seductive than gold. A legend that promised not just wealth, but paradise. As the Naha faded into myth, a new story began to take shape. A story of a hidden garden, a place where the snow never fell and the flowers bloomed in the dead of winter. The human mind is a pattern-seeking machine. When faced with the infinite white desolation of the subarctic winter, the mind begins to crave its opposite. It craves color, it craves warmth, it craves life. Perhaps this is why the legend of the tropical valley is the most seductive trap the Nahanni has ever set. If the gold was the bait that drew men to their physical destruction, the legend of the tropical valley was the siren song that lured them to their psychological ruin. It sounds like madness to even say it aloud. A tropical jungle hidden in the latitude of the Yukon, a place where the snow never falls, where ferns grow as high as trees, and where prehistoric beasts still graze on lush green grass while blizzards rage just over the ridge. It sounds like a fever dream, but in the 1920s and 30s, this wasn't regarded as fantasy. It was regarded as a geographic possibility. Newspapers across the continent ran with the story. They called it the Shangri-La of the North. They published maps with vague arrows pointing into the blank spaces of the Mackenzie Mountains, marking spots where warm winds were said to blow eternally. It was a romantic notion, a desperate hope born of the Depression era. Men who were starving in the cities looked north and saw a paradise where game was plentiful and the cold could not touch them. But the Nahanni does not deal in romance. It deals in thermodynamics. The legend is built on a kernel of scientific fact, twisted by the lens of isolation. The Nahanni is geologically active. It is a land of karst limestone and tectonic fractures. Deep beneath the permafrost, the earth is boiling. This heat escapes to the surface in the form of hot springs, specifically the Crouse Hot Springs and the Rabbit Kettle Hot Spring. Imagine the scene. You have been trekking for weeks in temperatures of 40 below zero. Your eyelashes are frozen shut. Your breath hangs in the air like crystal fog. You are on the verge of hypothermia. And then you turn a bend in the canyon, and you see it. Steam. Columns of white steam rising into the blue sky. The snow around the riverbank has melted away. There is green grass. There are bushes with leaves. For a man dying of cold, this isn't just a relief, it is a religious experience. But this is the trap. These are microclimates. They are tiny pockets of warmth, bubbles of life surrounded by an ocean of death. The tropical valley isn't a valley at all. It is a series of geothermal vents. The Crouse Hot Springs, named after the brave, or perhaps mad Gus Crouse, who lived there with his wife Mary, created a garden in the wilderness. They grew cabbages and potatoes in the shadow of the glaciers, but if you walked 500 yards away from the spring, the winter would kill you just as dead as if you were on the open tundra. The mist created by these springs adds to the illusion. The heavy, sulfur-laden fog clings to the valley floor, obscuring the ground. From the air or from a high ridge, it looks like a distinct atmospheric layer. It hides what is beneath, and it was this mist that doomed so many. Prospectors would see the fog and think they had found the warm valley. They would push towards it, abandoning their winter protocols, shedding gear, convinced they were walking into Eden. Instead, they were walking into a steam bath that would freeze on their skin the moment they stepped out of the thermal radius. They chased a mirage of palm trees and found only boiling water and brimstone. And the smell, that is the detail the old journals always mention. The smell of sulfur, rotten eggs, brimstone. To the Dini, this wasn't the smell of a tropical paradise, it was the smell of the underworld. It was the breath of the earth monsters. This geothermal activity does more than just melt snow. It creates caves. The Nahanni is a honeycomb. The Grot of Valerie, discovered much later, is a prime example. It is an ice cave, a cathedral of frozen waterfalls, and preserved history. Inside these caves, explorers have found the skeletons of Dall sheep, perfectly preserved for thousands of years, trapped by the ice. This leads us to the darker side of the tropical valley legend. If the heat could preserve plants, could it preserve other things? Could it sustain species that should have died out with the Ice Age? The stories of prehistoric relics are inextricably tied to the Warm Valley myth. Prospectors didn't just report giant ferns, they reported tracks. Three-toed footprints in the mud that didn't match any known animal. Stories of mammoths moving through the mist, their shaggy coats protected from the elements by the thermal pockets. We can dismiss the mammoths as hallucinations brought on by isolation and whiskey, but we cannot dismiss the other tracks. The tracks that look human but are too large. The tracks that look like a wolf but are too heavy. The tropical valley was the stage, but the actors on that stage were nightmares. This brings us to the Nakani. If you talk to a cryptozoologist about the North, they will immediately bring up the Sasquatch, the gentle giant of the Pacific Northwest. But the Dini do not speak of a gentle giant. They speak of the Nakani or the Bushman, and the distinction is vital. The Sasquatch is often described as an ape, a relict hominid, perhaps Gigantopithecus, living in the deep forests. But the Nakani is described differently. The Dine accounts are specific and chillingly consistent. The Nakani is not an ape, it is a man, or something that was once a man. They are described as hairy, yes, but they wear clothes. Loincloths made of woven moose hide. They use tools. They carry clubs. They build crude shelters. They are not animals, they are a tribe of wild men who live in the high caves and the thermal pockets, watching the river people. The Nakani are not shy, they are aggressive. They are blamed for the vandalism of camps, the theft of food, and most disturbingly, the abduction of women and children. The oral histories are full of stories of hunters hearing whistling in the woods, not bird calls, but human whistling, only to return to camp and find their families gone. This connects directly to the paleo-human relic theory. Remember the Naha. the rod-armored warriors who vanished? What if they didn't die out? What if they devolved? Or what if they were simply a different branch of the human family tree that took a different path? In 1964, there was a rash of sightings in the territory. Experienced trappers, men who knew the difference between a bear and a man, reported seeing dark, hairy figures moving through the tree line. Figures that stood upright, moved with human gaits, but possessed inhuman speed and strength. They called them the Nukluk. Anthropologists like to dismiss these stories as wild man myths, a universal archetype found in every culture. But in the Nahanni, the geography supports the impossible. The karst cave systems, warmed by the geothermal vents, provide the perfect habitat for a small troglodytic population to survive undetected. They have heat, they have shelter, they have a food source in the valley. If the Nakani exist, they are the perfect candidates for the killers of the Nahanni. They have the motive, territorial defense. They have the means, clubs, and immense strength, and they fit the profile of the Headless Valley murders. A primitive human or near-human species might practice headhunting as a ritual. They might burn cabins to drive away the modern intruders. But the Nakani are not the only monsters in the valley. There is something else, something that hunts on 4 legs, but thinks like it walks on 2. We need to talk about the Waheela. In the taxonomy of fear, the wolf holds a special place, but the Waheela is not a wolf, not in the way we understand the Canis lupus. The Dini described the Waheela as a distinct species, a wolf beast. The descriptions are consistent and terrifying. They are white. They are massive, significantly larger than a timber wolf. They have broad chests, and crucial to our investigation, they have heads that are described as bear-like, wide, heavy jaws, crushing power, and they do not hunt in packs. The Waheela is a solitary predator. It hunts alone. This biological detail is the key. Pack hunters rely on coordination and exhaustion to kill prey. Solitary hunters rely on ambush and overwhelming force. A solitary predator needs a weapon that can end a fight instantly. It needs a bite that shatters bone. Cryptozoologist proposed a theory that sends a chill down the spine of anyone familiar with the Pleistocene epoch. He suggested that the Waheela is not a wolf at all. He suggested it is an amphicyonid, a bear dog. Amphicyonids were apex predators that supposedly went extinct millions of years ago. They combined the speed and agility of a wolf with the crushing power and bulk of a bear. They were the perfect killing machines. If a relic population of amphicyonids survived in the thermal microclimates of the Nahanni, protected from the ice ages, isolated from competition, it would explain the forensic anomalies of the Deadman Valley murders. Think about the bite mechanics of a bear dog. These animals had jaws designed to crush the vertebrae of megafauna. If such a creature attacked a human, it wouldn't nip and tear like a wolf. It would bite the head. And with a single violent shake, the sheer mechanical force would be enough to decapitate a man. It fits the timeline, it fits the geography, and it fits the corpses. The McLeod brothers, Martin Jorgenson, Phil Powers, they weren't killed by ghosts. They were killed by an apex predator that viewed them as intruders in its hunting ground. The missing heads were not trophies taken by a serial killer. They were the result of a predation style that evolution perfected millions of years ago. But this theory, as compelling as it is, has a flaw. Animals don't light fires. A Waheela might pop your head off, but it won't burn your cabin down to hide the body. This forces us to confront the most disturbing possibility of all. What if there isn't just one thing in the valley? What if the Nahanni is a convergence point, a place where the Bushman and the wolf beast coexist, a place where the survivors of the Naha retreated underground, while the prehistoric monsters claim the forests? Or perhaps the burning cabins and the missing heads are connected in a way we haven't grasped yet. Perhaps the bad medicine, the mishali, isn't just a metaphor for bad luck. Perhaps it is a description of a psychological contagion. The wind in the canyons, the infrasound, the isolation, it drives men mad. We know this. We have reports of prospectors running into the bush, screaming about them, about the voices, about the eyes in the trees. What if the killer isn't a monster? What if the valley makes monsters out of men? The sun is setting over the funeral range. The temperature is dropping, and the spirits are waking up. We have established the setting. A geographic fortress of canyons and geothermal mists. We have established the history. A vanished tribe, the Naha, who left their fires burning and disappeared into the earth. And we have established the crime. A series of gruesome decapitations and arson attacks that defy conventional explanation. Now we must turn our attention to the suspects. When you enter the world of high strangeness in the north, you inevitably encounter the legends of the hairy man, the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Yeti. It is a global archetype, a shadow that walks upright in the corner of the human psyche. But in the Nahanni Valley, the archetype takes on a darker, more specific, and significantly more threatening form. The Dini do not speak of a gentle giant hiding in the rainforests. They do not tell stories of a shy, ape-like creature that throws pine cones and runs away from cameras. They speak of the Nakani, and the difference between a Sasquatch and a Nakani is the difference between an animal and an enemy. The translation of the word Nakani varies, but the intent is always the same. It means brushman. It means bad Indian. It means the enemy. This is not a biological curiosity to be studied. It is a clear and present danger to be avoided. The Nakani is described not as a beast, but as a man, or something that was once a man who has gone feral, or perhaps belongs to a lineage of humanity that civilization forgot. This distinction is critical to our investigation of the headless bodies. If we were dealing with a rogue grizzly bear or a pack of wolves, the forensics would be messy, brutal, and instinctive. Animals kill for food or defense. They do not kill for territory in the political sense. They do not use fire. They do not collect trophies. But the Nakani is intelligent. The oral histories of the Slavian Mountain Dean describe the Nakani as having human attributes that are terrifyingly specific. They are said to be covered in hair, yes, but they possess human faces. They are often described as having red, glowing eyes, a detail that could be attributed to the reflective layer in the eyes of nocturnal predators, suggesting these creatures have adapted to the dark. They are immensely strong, capable of tearing small trees out of the ground and running at speeds that no human can match. But here is the detail that shifts the Nakani from the realm of cryptozoology into the realm of anthropology. They wear clothes. Numerous reports describe the Nakani wearing loincloths made of woven moose hide. They carry tools. They are seen with stone clubs, spears, and crude knives. An animal does not weave leather. An animal does not fashion a stone bludgeon. This suggests a culture, a primitive Stone Age culture that has survived in parallel with our own, hidden in the vastness of the Mackenzie Mountains. In 1964, the legends of the Nakani collided with modern reality in a series of sightings that shook the territory. This wasn't a case of a lonely trapper seeing a shadow in a blizzard. These were multiple, independent sightings by experienced woodsmen who knew exactly what they were looking at. The most famous of these encounters involved a man named John Baptist. Baptist was a resident of Fort Liard, a man who worked for the school and knew the bush. In April of 1964, he was near the river when he saw a figure emerge from the trees. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a man. It was something in between. Baptist described the creature as short, about 5 feet tall, and powerfully built. It was covered in dark hair, but it had a long, thick beard, distinctly human. It was wearing a moose skin loincloth, and in its hand it carried a stone club. This creature, often referred to locally as the Nukluk, a variation of the Nakani legend, did not panic. It stood its ground. It made a low growling noise, a warning, and then retreated into the bush. Baptist, a man who had lived his life in the north, was terrified. He wasn't looking at a monster, he was looking at a relic, a living fossil. Later that same year, there were other sightings. A boy in Fort Simpson saw a small, dark, hairy figure near the edge of town. Tracks were found, footprints that looked human, but were too long, too narrow, or splayed in ways that didn't fit the anatomy of Homo sapiens. So what are we dealing with here? If we strip away the supernatural elements, the red eyes, the vanishing axe, we are left with a biological profile that looks suspiciously like a relict hominid. Cryptozoologists like Ivan Sanderson and Lauren Coleman have proposed that the Nakani or Nukluk might be a surviving population of Neanderthals or Denisovans. Think about the geography again. The Nahanni Valley was a glacial refuge. During the last ice age, when the rest of the continent was buried under 2 miles of ice, parts of the Nahanni remained ice-free. The high canyon walls blocked the glaciers. The geothermal vents kept the valley floor warm. It was an oasis in a frozen world. If a population of archaic humans, tough, cold-adapted, intelligent, found their way into the valley, they could have survived. They could have retreated into the karst cave systems, the troglodyte lifestyle mentioned in the legends, to escape the extreme cold of the winters. Over thousands of years, they would have adapted to the isolation. They would have become the masters of the canyons, the guardians of the hot springs. This paleo-human hypothesis fits the forensic profile of the murders perfectly. Let's look at the decapitations of the McLeod brothers and Martin Jorgenson. Headhunting is a distinctly human practice. It is found in tribal cultures across the globe. It is a ritual of warfare, a way to steal the power of an enemy or prove one's dominance. If the Nakani are a primitive tribe protecting their territory, decapitation would be a logical, if horrific, tactic. It sends a message: you do not belong here. And the fire, the burning of the cabins. Again, this is a human tactic. It is strategic. The Nakani might not understand how to use a match, but they would understand fire. They would know that fire destroys. They would know that burning the white man's shelter drives him away. The Dini describe the Nakani as sneakers. They are masters of stealth. They are said to communicate by whistling, sharp, bird-like sounds that carry through the woods. How many prospectors sitting alone by their fires heard a whistle in the dark and thought it was a night bird? How many felt eyes on their backs and dismissed it as nerves, not realizing they were being assessed by a predator that could think? The Nakani are also blamed for kidnappings. The legends are full of stories of women and children vanishing from camps while the men were away. This too fits the biological imperative of a small, isolated population. They need genetic diversity. They need breeding stock. It is a terrifying thought, but it is a biological reality for any isolated group facing extinction. When we look at the disappearance of the Naha tribe, the rod-armored warriors we discussed earlier, we have to wonder if there is a connection. Did the Naha become the Nakani? Did they retreat into the caves and devolve into a more primitive state? Or were the Naha wiped out by the Nakani? Was the vanishing of the Naha actually a genocide committed by the creatures in the caves? The Mongol caves of the Nahanni are central to this mystery. These are the deep limestone fissures that riddle the canyon walls. Some are accessible only by climbing gear. Explorers like Jean Poirel found strange things in these caves: bones, artifacts, and signs of habitation. If a species of nocturnal, cave-dwelling hominids existed in the valley, they would be almost impossible to find unless they wanted to be found. They would hear you coming miles away. They would smell you, and they would simply retreat deeper into the earth, into the labyrinth of the karst, where no flashlight can reach. The Nakani represents the uncanny valley in the flesh. They are terrifying not because they are monsters, but because they are almost us. They are the shadow reflection of humanity, stripped of civilization, armed with stone, and fighting for survival in a land that kills the weak. But there is a problem. The Nakani explains the intelligence, it explains the fire, it explains the missing heads as trophies. When we look at the police reports, particularly regarding the death of Phil Powers and others, there are details that don't fit the wild man theory. Powers' rifle was bent and twisted. The force required to bend a steel rifle barrel is immense. A man, even a very strong, wild man, would struggle to do that in the heat of combat. And then there are the bite marks. Some of the remains found in the valley, and the carcasses of animals found by trappers, show signs of predation that defy the human jaw. Bones crushed to powder, spines snapped with a single shake, massive tissue loss that suggests a predator of enormous size and appetite. The Nakani might carry a club, but they do not have jaws that can snap a moose's femur. They might be aggressive, but they are not apex predators in the biological sense. They are scavengers, hunters, opportunists. There is something else in the valley, something that the Nakani themselves might fear, something that doesn't hide in caves, but prowls the mist-shrouded forest with a confidence born of being the absolute top of the food chain. The sun is down. The whistle of the Nakani has faded. Now listen for the howl. It's deeper than a wolf, it's louder, and it's getting closer. In the taxonomy of nightmares, the wolf occupies a specific primal niche. It is the pack hunter, the endurance predator, the shadow that circles the firelight waiting for the flames to die down. We understand wolves. We have studied their biology, their hierarchy, and their hunting patterns for centuries. We know that they kill by exhaustion and hemorrhage. They nip and tear, wearing their prey down until it collapses. They are efficient, but they are messy. But the creature that stalks the Nahanni Valley is not a wolf, at least not in any sense that a modern biologist would recognize. The DNA elders are very specific about this. They have a word for the timber wolf, tika, but they have a different word for the white phantom that rules the upper canyons. They call it the Waheela. This distinction is not a matter of semantics, it is a matter of survival. To mistake a Waheela for a wolf is a fatal error, because the rules of engagement are entirely different. A wolf hunts in a pack, the Waheela hunts alone. A wolf avoids humans, the Waheela tracks them. And most terrifyingly of all, a wolf tears at the flesh, but the Waheela crushes the bone. We are leaving the realm of anthropology and entering the domain of paleobiology. We are about to investigate the possibility that the Headless Valley earned its name not from a human serial killer, but from a biological anomaly, a prehistoric relic that has survived in the thermal microclimates of the Mackenzie Mountains long after the rest of its kind turned to dust. The reports of the Waheela are remarkably consistent across decades and demographics. Witnesses describe a canid of immense proportions, significantly larger than the largest timber wolf. It is almost always described as white or pale cream in color, allowing it to vanish into the snow or the mists of the hot springs. But it is the physiological details that chill the blood. Witnesses describe a creature with a chest as broad as a barrel and legs that are relatively short and thick compared to the lanky frame of a modern wolf. They describe widely splayed toes designed for moving silently over deep snow or muskeg. But the most defining feature, the feature that appears in report after report, is the head. It does not have the sleek, tapered muzzle of a canine. It has a head that is described as bear-like, wide, heavy, and blocky. In 1965, a mechanic named Frank Graves was working in the valley. He was a rational man, a man of machines and measurements, not given to flights of fancy. He was exploring a plateau near the South Nahanni River with a DNA guide when he saw movement in the brush. He assumed it was a moose or a caribou. He raised his rifle. Then the creature stepped out. Graves described it as a white beast that looked more like a gigantic dog than a wolf, but it was massive. He estimated it was 20 times the size of any wolf he had ever heard of. That is likely an exaggeration born of adrenaline, but it conveys the sheer, overwhelming scale of the animal. Graves fired. He hit the creature with 2 barrels of ball shot at close range. A shot like that would drop a grizzly bear. It would disintegrate a normal wolf, but the Waheela didn't fall. It didn't yelp. It didn't even break stride. It simply absorbed the impact, turned its massive, bear-like head to look at him, and then walked calmly back into the forest. It didn't need to run. It knew it was the king. When Graves asked his Dean guide what they had just seen, the guide was terrified. He told Graves that they had encountered the Waheela. He explained that these creatures were rare, solitary, and supernatural. They were not to be hunted. They were to be avoided at all costs. This encounter provides us with crucial data points. We have a solitary predator. We have immense durability. We have a distinct morphology that blends canine and ursine features. So what is it? In the 1970s, the renowned cryptozoologist Ivan Sanderson looked at the data and proposed a theory that is both scientifically plausible and utterly horrifying. He suggested that the Waheela is not a wolf nor a bear, but a survivor from a lineage that predates them both. He believed the Waheela is an amphicyonid. You might know them by their colloquial name, bear dogs. Amphicyonids were the apex predators of the Miocene epoch. They were nightmare engines of evolution, combining the best features of the 2 most dominant predator families. They had the speed and agility of a wolf, allowing them to run down prey, but they had the bulk, the muscle mass, and the crushing power of a bear. The species Amphicyon engines, the largest of the group, weighed over 1,000 pounds. It was a hypercarnivore. But it is the jaw mechanics of the amphicyonid that are relevant to our investigation. Modern wolves have jaws designed for shearing meat. Bears have jaws designed for grinding omnivorous diets. But the bear dog had jaws designed for one thing: bone crushing. These animals were built to hunt megafauna. They didn't nip at the heels of their prey. They delivered a bite of catastrophic power. They could crush vertebrae, shatter femurs, and decapitate prey with a single violent shake of their massive heads. Now let's overlay this biological profile onto the forensic evidence of the Nahanni murders. The McLeod brothers, Martin Jorgenson, Phil Powers, the unknown miner of 1945, all found headless. If a human kills you, they have to use a tool to remove the head: a knife, an axe, a saw. It takes time. It leaves specific tool marks on the bone. It is a messy, deliberate process. But if an amphicyanid attacks you, it doesn't need a knife. Imagine a predator that views a human not as a threat, but as a snack. It attacks. It lunges for the most vulnerable point, the head or the neck. It clamps down with jaws capable of exerting thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch. It doesn't let go. It shakes its head, a violent thrashing motion used to snap the spine of a prehistoric horse or a camel. In that split second, the cervical vertebrae shatter. The soft tissue tears. The head is separated from the body not by a surgical cut, but by sheer traumatic mechanical force. The predator then retreats with its prize. Why take the head? Because in the skull, there is the brain, a dense source of fat and protein. To a bone-crushing predator, the head isn't a trophy. It's the most nutritious part of the kill. This explains the clean nature of the disappearances. It explains why the bodies were often left relatively intact otherwise. The predator took the high-value item and left. It also explains the bent rifle of Phil Powers. If Powers was attacked in his cabin by a creature of that size, he would have tried to fight it off. He might have used his rifle as a club, swinging it with all his might against a skull as hard as concrete. The barrel bent not because he hit a man, but because he hit a monster that didn't flinch. Is it possible that a population of amphicyanids survived in the Nahanni? From a biological standpoint, it is improbable, but not impossible. The Nahanni was a glacial refuge. While the rest of North America was scoured clean by ice sheets, the deep canyons of the Nahanni remained green. The thermal springs created microclimates where the temperature remained stable. The valley is isolated, cut off by jagged peaks that act as natural fences. If a small population of these creatures retreated into the valley millions of years ago, they could have survived. They would have had ample prey: moose, caribou, and Dall sheep. They would have had shelter in the karst caves. They would have been the undisturbed masters of a lost world. When the white men came with their noise and their fires, they were invading a territory that had been held by a super predator. The burning of the cabins takes on a new light in this theory. We assumed the fires were arson, a human act of concealment, but consider this. Bears are attracted to human camps by the smell of food. They often rampage through cabins, tearing them apart. If a stove is overturned during the attack, if a lantern is smashed, the cabin burns. It isn't malice, it is collateral damage. The Waheela theory also aligns with the strange behavior of the local wolves. Albert Foley, the legendary prospector who spent a lifetime in the valley, reported being stalked by wolves that didn't behave like wolves. They were silent, they moved differently. They didn't howl. They made sounds that Foley described as lying somewhere between a growl, a bark, and a howl. Other prospectors reported seeing giant white wolves hunting alone. Tex Ziegler, the flying trader, saw them from the air. Paul W., an outdoorsman, reported a white wolf in northern Ontario that weighed over 200 pounds and had a head so broad it looked deformed. These are not timber wolves. These are relics. The Naha knew about them. They painted them on rock walls. They told stories of the Waheela to their children, warning them never to walk alone in the high country. They knew that there was a beast in the woods that didn't fear man, a beast that could snap a warrior in half. Perhaps the disappearance of the Naha was not a migration, but a retreat. Perhaps they realized that they could not compete with the Waheela. Perhaps the vanishing was a tactical withdrawal from a war against nature that they could not win. And when the McLeods arrived, confident and armed with their low-caliber rifles, they walked straight into the jaws of a creature that had been killing things much bigger than them for 20 million years. The Waheela explains the bodies. It explains the fear. It explains the geographic kill zone. It is the biological enforcer of the valley's isolation. But even though Waheela, terrifying as it is a creature of flesh and blood, it can be shot, it can be tracked, it can be understood. The Dine elders speak of McLeod, bad medicine. They speak of a spirit that drives men mad, that lures them off cliffs and into the freezing water. They say the valley itself is alive and that it hates intruders. The Waheela might take your head, but the valley wants your mind. We have looked at the bodies. We have analyzed the bite marks. We have profiled the predators that might be stalking the tree line. But if you talk to the men who have actually spent a winter in the Nahanni, not the tourists who fly in for a week in July, but the trappers who sit out the long, crushing darkness in a 12 by 12 cabin, they will tell you that the animals are the least of your worries. A wolf can be shot. A bear can be trapped. A Waheela, terrifying as it is made of meat and bone. And if it bleeds, we can kill it. But you cannot shoot a frequency. You cannot trap a vibration. And you certainly cannot kill a feeling that tells you, with absolute, unwavering certainty, that you are going to die. We are moving into the invisible spectrum of the mystery now. We are leaving the biology of the wolf beast and entering the psychology of the canyon itself. We are going to investigate the possibility that the Nahanni Valley is not just a habitat for monsters, but a weapon. A geographic machine designed to break the human mind. The Dine elders have a word for this. They call it Michili. It is often translated simply as bad medicine, but that is a clumsy, colonial translation. Michili is not just bad luck, it is a presence, a heaviness. It is the spiritual equivalent of a radioactive zone. When the Dine hunters approached the entrance to the canyons, they would stop. They would perform rituals. They would leave offerings. They weren't being superstitious, they were putting on spiritual hazmat suits. They knew that beyond that point, the rules of the normal world did not apply. At the center of this spiritual minefield is an entity that makes the Nakani look like a nuisance. The Dine call it Sonataye. The translation is chillingly vague, the bad thing, or sometimes the evil spirit, but the descriptions are specific. Sonataye is not a ghost, it is one of the greater spirits. Its occupation, according to the ethnographer Father Julius Yete, who lived among the northern tribes in the early 1900s, is to kill men. Sonataye does not hunt with claws. It hunts with sickness. It hunts with madness. It sends its minions, the Naked Zaltara, shadowy demon-like entities to infest a camp. When the Naked Zaltara arrive, the dogs stop barking. The air gets heavy, and the people begin to lose their minds. This sounds like folklore. It sounds like a way to explain disease or mental illness in a pre-scientific society. But what if Sonataye is just the indigenous name for a physical phenomenon that we are only just beginning to understand? Let's talk about the wind. Every explorer who has entered the Nahanni has written about the wind. Frank Henderson, the prospector who lost his partner in 1946, described the weird continual wailing that never stopped. Pierre Berton, the famous Canadian journalist who led an expedition in 1947, called it a banshee wail that made the hackles rise on the back of his neck. The Nahanni canyons are deep, narrow, and vertical. They act as wind tunnels. When the Arctic gales hit the Tlogotcho range, the air is compressed and forced through these limestone corridors at tremendous speed. It creates a noise that is deafening, but it also creates a noise that you cannot hear. It creates infrasound. Infrasound refers to sound waves with a frequency below 20 Hz. This is below the threshold of human hearing. You cannot hear infrasound, but you can feel it. It passes through the body. It vibrates the fluid in the inner ear. It resonates in the chest cavity. And the effects on the human brain are profound. In controlled laboratory settings, exposure to high-intensity infrasound, specifically around 18.9 Hz, often called the ghost frequency, causes a range of physiological and psychological symptoms. Subjects report feelings of intense sorrow. They report sudden, irrational dread. They feel nauseated. They feel a pressure on the chest, often described as a weight or a presence. But most interestingly, they report hallucinations. Infrasound can vibrate the eyeballs, causing visual distortions. You see shadows moving in your peripheral vision. You see shapes that aren't there. You see gray figures standing in the tree line. Transport that laboratory experiment into the Nahanni Valley. You are a prospector in 1920. You are alone. You are malnourished. It is 40 below zero. The wind begins to blow through the second canyon. It hits the resonant frequency of the rock walls. You don't hear the low hum, but your body feels it. Suddenly you are overcome with a feeling of absolute terror. You feel like you are being watched. You look into the trees, and your vibrating eyes turn a shadow into a monster. You feel the bad medicine pressing down on you. This is the geographic kill zone in action. The valley isn't haunted, it is resonant. It is a sonic weapon. This hypothesis explains the behavior of the victims. Remember the police reports. Men found frozen to death who had fled their cabins without their shoes. Men found clutching rifles they never fired. This is the behavior of panic. Irrational, blind panic. If you are sitting in your cabin and suddenly the infrasound hits you, your brain tells you that there is a predator in the room. Your fight or flight response triggers, but there is nothing to fight. The terror builds. It becomes unbearable. You have to get out. You have to escape the noise that isn't a noise. So you run. You run out into the snow, into the dark, away from the safety of the fire, and the cold takes you. Or perhaps the infrasound drove you to turn on each other. Imagine two partners. Hold up for the winter. The wind starts. The infrasound settles in. Paranoia sets in. You start to suspect your partner is stealing your gold. You start to think he's plotting against you. The bad thing Sonatai has entered the cabin. We have accounts of this. Frontiersmen call it shanty rot or cabin fever, but in the Nahanni, it seems to be accelerated. Dick Turner, a trapper who lived in the area for decades, wrote about men who would lie in their bunks for years, facing the wall, rotting away from apathy. He wrote about men who would accuse their best friends of theft, whispering about them, the invisible enemies. This is the insidious nature of the Nahanni curse. It doesn't always need a monster. It just needs to let the geography do the work. The canyons scream, the mind breaks, and the man destroys himself. But does infrasound explain everything? It explains the panic. It explains the hallucinations. But it does not explain the physical evidence. Infrasound cannot cut off a head. Infrasound cannot burn down a cabin. Infrasound cannot bend a rifle barrel. This forces us to consider a terrifying synergy. What if the valley uses the infrasound to soften you up for the predators? Think of it as a hunting strategy. The Waheela the bear dog doesn't need to hunt a man who is alert and armed. It waits. It waits for the wind to blow. It waits for the bad medicine to set in. It waits for the prospector to be paralyzed by dread, or to run screaming from his cabin in a fit of sonic-induced madness. Then it strikes. The Dine legends actually support this. They say that Sonatai sends his minions, the Nekedzaltara, to prepare the way. The spirits weaken the prey. The physical monsters finish the job. It is a symbiotic relationship between the geology and the biology of the region. And there is one more spirit we need to discuss. A spirit that doesn't fit the pattern of malice, but hints at something even stranger. The Dine speak of Ndambadeja. This is not an evil spirit. Ndambadeja is described as a traveler, a supernatural entity that moves through the mountains. When the Dine hunters passed the Rabbit Kettle hot springs, those massive tufa mounds that look like alien beehives, they would leave offerings for Ndambadeja, tobacco, matches, small trinkets. Why? Because Ndambadeja was a protector. But protector from what? The legends say that in ancient times, the world was chaotic. Giants and monsters roamed the earth, preying on humans. Ndambadeja came to restore order. He hunted the monsters, he drove them into the caves, he diminished their size, he established the laws of the land. This sounds like a standard creation myth, until you look at the landscape. The Nahanni is full of monsters that have been diminished. The Nakani are smaller than the giants of old. The Waheela is a survivor of a megafauna lineage. The valley is a museum of the things Ndambadeja failed to kill. But there is a physical reality to this spirit as well. The Dine say that Ndambadeja ascended into the sky. They associate him with a constellation they call Yida, the Traveler. This constellation rotates around the North Star, marking the passage of the seasons. It connects the land to the sky. And in the Nahanni, the sky is just as active as the ground. We have reports of sky people, legends of tribes that descended from the stars. The Ket people of Siberia, who are linguistically related to the Dene, claim explicitly that they are aliens who came from the stars. Is it possible that the spirits of the canyon are not just ghost or acoustic tricks? Is it possible that the bad medicine is the residual effect of something else, something technological? We have documented cases of UFO activity in the region. The Clan Lake incident, the lights over Yellowknife. The north is a window area for high strangeness. Could the infrasound be a byproduct of something unrelated to wind? Could the burning cabins be the result of directed energy, interpreted by prospectors as arson? We are reaching the limits of what conventional history can tell us. We have looked at the biology, geology, and psychology. Now we must look at the outliers, the stories that don't fit. We have explored the monsters that stalk the tree line and the spirits that scream in the wind. We have dissected the biological and geological traps of the Nahanni, but there is one legend that stands apart. It is a story that sounds less like a frontier mystery and more like a pulp fantasy novel. Yet it appears in the journals of hard-bitten fur traders and the oral histories of the Dene. It is the legend of the White Queen. In the taxonomy of the Nahanni's horrors, this is the outlier. The Nakani are terrifying because they are wild. The Waheela is terrifying because it is a beast. But the White Queen, she is terrifying because she implies a hierarchy. She implies that the chaos of the valley has a ruler. The legend describes a woman of striking beauty, pale-skinned, often described as European in appearance, who rules over the wild men of the mountains. She commands the Nakani. She lives in a hidden fortress in the high peaks, protected by the wolves in the winter. It sounds impossible. It sounds like a hallucination, born of loneliness and snowblindness. But in the archives of the Hudson's Bay Company, there is a journal entry that stops the blood cold. The year is 1838. The explorer is Robert Campbell, a Scot who opened up the Yukon for the HBC. He was a man of facts, not fables. In his journals, he describes an encounter with a tribe known as the Trading Nahanni, likely the Tahltan people, neighbors to the mysterious Naha. Campbell describes meeting their leader. It wasn't a war chief, it was a woman. He wrote that she was a fine-looking woman, rather above the middle height. He noted with considerable surprise that in her appearance and her manner, she was more like the whites than the pure Indian race. He described her as having intelligent eyes that flashed like fire when she was angry. This woman wasn't just a figurehead, she wielded absolute power. Campbell recounts a night when his party was surrounded by hostile warriors, ready to be massacred. This chiefess stepped in. She walked into the line of fire. She stared down the warriors. She saved the lives of the white explorers with a single command. Is this the seed of the White Queen legend? A historical figure, a powerful female chief with lighter skin, perhaps due to Russian genetic influence from the coast, whose reputation grew into mythology. It is the rational explanation. But in the Nahanni, the rational explanation is rarely the whole truth. The legends of the White Queen are often tied to another anomaly, the Mongol caves. In the 1930s, as the gold rush faded and the aviation age began, pilots flying over the canyon walls reported dark openings high in the limestone cliffs. These weren't small fissures, they were massive, cathedral-like entrances. They looked inaccessible, cut off by thousands of feet of sheer rock. But the prospectors who managed to reach the lower caves brought back strange stories. They reported finding artifacts that didn't fit the local culture. They spoke of Mongol-style armor. They spoke of pottery. They found the remains of campfires deep underground, in places where no modern human would choose to live. This brings us back to the Naha. Remember the theory that the Naha vanished underground, that they retreated into the karst systems to escape a threat. If they did, they would need a social structure. They would need leadership. The legend of the White Queen might not be about a ghost. It might be a distorted memory of a matriarchal lineage that governed the Naha in their subterranean exile. In 1964, a French explorer named Jean Porel did what no one else dared. He parachuted into the headwaters of the Nahanni. He explored the caves, and what he found in a system now known as Grotta Valerie changed our understanding of the valley forever. Grotta Valerie is an ice cave. It is a time capsule. Inside, Poirot found a chamber he called the Gallery of Dead Sheep. It is exactly what it sounds like. Hundreds of doll sheep skeletons, perfectly preserved in the ice. Carbon dating placed some of them back thousands of years. These animals had wandered into the cave seeking shelter, or perhaps lured by the warmth of the entrance, and then became lost in the labyrinth. They couldn't get out. They died in the dark, and the ice entombed them. This proves that the caves are a trap, but it also proves they are a preservative. If sheep can be preserved for millennia, what else is in there? The Mongol cave theory suggests that the Nahanni might have been a migration route during the last ice age. The corridor theory of human migration suggests that early peoples moved south from Beringia through an ice-free corridor. The Nahanni was part of that corridor. Did a group of ancient migrants, proto-Mongoloid peoples, stop in the valley? Did they use the caves as shelters? The rod armor of the Naha bears a striking resemblance to armor used by Siberian tribes. The pale skin of the White Queen might not be European. It might be ancient Asiatic genetics, preserved in isolation. We have to consider the possibility that the White Queen and the Nakani are two sides of the same coin. The Nakani are the degenerate, feral descendants of the Naha men, the hunters, the enforcers. The White Queen represents the preserved lineage of the Naha leadership, hidden away in the deepest, warmest caves, protected by the bad medicine that keeps intruders at bay. It sounds fantastic. But look at the behavior of the valley. It actively repels exploration. It burns cabins. It beheads intruders. It uses fear as a weapon. This is the behavior of a guarded fortress. And if there is a queen in the mountain, she is not a benevolent ruler. She is the keeper of the geographic kill zone. She is the reason the wolves hunt alone. She is the reason the wind screams. We have looked at the past. We have looked at the legends. But the most terrifying thing about the Nahanni is not what happened in 1908. It is what is happening now. The curse didn't end with the gold rush. The valley is still taking people. And in the 21st century, the mysteries have evolved. They have moved from the ground to the sky. We are about to open the file on the modern mysteries. We are going to look at the death of David Horsey. We are going to look at the Clan Lake UFO crash. And we are going to synthesize everything we have learned into a final theory of the Nahanni Valley. The White Queen is watching, the Waheela is waiting, and we are crossing the final threshold. You might think the Valley of the Headless Men is just an old ghost story. You might think satellite maps and GPS have solved the mystery. You would be wrong. The Nahanni Valley does not care about the year. It is a timeless machine, and it is still running. In June 2005, the curse struck again. This was not a story of tourists getting lost. This was a tragedy involving two men who knew the land better than anyone. David Horsey and Frederick Hardesty. They were experienced woodsmen with the bush in their blood. They went to a cabin about 78 miles northwest of Fort Simpson. It should have been routine. But when friends checked on them, they found a scene echoing the nightmares of 1908. The cabin was abandoned in a state of high strangeness. Their supplies and food were still there. Most critically, their firearms were there. In the North, a rifle is life. You never leave your cabin without it. You certainly do not walk into the bush unarmed. The stove fire had burned to ash, suggesting a sudden panic. A massive search launched, utilizing helicopters and trackers. They found Horsey days later, 3 miles away in thick bush, dead of hypothermia. The haunting detail. His hands were burned. He had desperately tried to start a fire with friction. While his matches lay in the cabin, he fled. Hardesty was found later, drowned in the river 13 miles away. Why would experts flee a warm cabin? Why run without guns? This points to the infrasound hypothesis. Imagine the wind picking up. The canyon walls vibrate, creating a low-frequency hum. This is the Tso Nedai. You cannot hear it, but you feel it. A sudden, crushing dread. Paranoia spikes into terror. You see shadows. You hear voices. The cabin feels like a trap. The infrasound vibrates your eyeballs, creating hallucinations. Reason breaks. Instinct takes over. You run. It is a modern retelling of the older tragedies. Resource abandonment, panic, death, tilt. But the strangeness of the Nahanni isn't just on the ground. The Northwest Territories is a known window area for unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. Take the Clan Lake incident of June 1960. 2 prospectors reported a massive object with rotating arms hovering silently. This wasn't a light, it was a structured craft. It dropped into the lake, creating a massive steam plume. The RCMP investigated and dragged the lake. They found nothing, but the report remains. A physical craft interacted with the environment and vanished. Is there a connection? Researchers call this the unified theory of high strangeness. It involves a trinity of activity: cryptids, poltergeists, and UFOs. The Nahanni has all 3. It has cryptids, the Waheela, wolf beast, and the Nakani, wild man. It has poltergeist activity, burning cabins and invisible spirits. It has UFOs, the lights in the sky, and the Clan Lake crash. Perhaps the valley is a geographic kill zone. Its isolation allowed ancient predators like the Waheela to survive. The thermal vents create microclimates for them. The canyon walls generate infrasound that panics prey, making them easy targets. In this view, the curse is not magic. It is a perfect storm of biology, geology, and acoustics. A meat grinder disguised as paradise. But there is a darker theory. In December 1996, 30 witnesses west of the Nahanni reported a UFO the size of 4 football stadiums. It moved silently, illuminating the ground. A craft of that magnitude does not belong to us. It was patrolling the mountains where the ancient Naha tribe vanished. Is the Nahanni a base, a colony? If this is a site of non-human interest, the infrasound makes perfect sense. It isn't just wind, it is a sonic fence. It is technology designed to induce panic and keep curious humans away from sensitive areas. This brings us to the legend of the White Queen. If the Naha were descendants of star people, perhaps she was a custodian left to watch over the colony. Perhaps the Nakani are not just wild men, but biological drones maintaining the perimeter. It suggests the Nahanni is not just haunted, it is occupied. We have the Waheela patrolling the forests. We have the Nakani guarding the caves. We have the infrasound shattering the mind. And above it all, the silent watchers in massive ships. The Valley of the Headless Men is a puzzle where the pieces form a picture of absolute dread. When you look at that empty space on the map of Canada, do not think of it as empty. Think of it as a room with the door closed. A room where the lights are out, but the occupants are awake. We have named the monsters, we have mapped the kill zones, but we have not solved the riddle. The riddle is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be feared. Some places are better left off the map. Keep your head down, keep your fire burning, and never ever listen to the wind. As we step back from the crossroads, remember the story doesn't end here, because this is just the beginning, searching for the knowledge and wisdom to unravel the mysteries of our universe. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected in the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.